Everyone argues about whether the Alpha Legion is loyal or traitor. It's the oldest debate in the entire setting. It has produced no consensus in 10,000 years of in-universe history and 30 years of fan argument. And the reason it hasn't is that both sides are right. Both are documented. Both are sourced. The contradiction isn't a failure of the evidence, it's the architecture of the Legion. Under a video about the Emperor's state on the Golden Throne, a video with nearly 500,000 views, a comment earned 458 upvotes. It read, "The real question is which version of the Emperor is the Alpha Legion serving?" That comment is the origin of this video. What follows is the attempt to answer it. Not by picking a side, by asking the prior question. Not loyal or traitor. Loyal to whom? Here is the traitor case, stated with the weight it deserves. Istvan 5, approximately 004005 M31. Horus has already purged loyalist elements from his 4 directly commanded legions on Istvan 3. Now he prepares the trap. He positions 7 loyalist legions to assault his position in the Istvan system. And 4 of them aren't loyal. They never were. The first wave lands. The Salamanders, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard. 40,000 Marines descending on 30,000 traitors. Progress is being made. Ferrus Manus leads 10 full companies of Morlock Terminators directly into the enemy center. Then the signal is given, and the reserve force moves. The Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, the Word Bearers, the Alpha Legion. The fandom wiki records what followed without softening it. The Alpha Legion fell upon their unsuspecting loyalist brothers without warning. 3 legions caught between traitor positions in front and traitor positions behind. Ferrus Manus was killed by Fulgrim. Vulcan went missing after a tactical nuclear assault on his section of the battlefield. Corvus Corax was critically wounded and barely evacuated with a fraction of his surviving legion. The head of Ferrus Manus was delivered to Horus as a trophy. The Alpha Legion is formally classified as Excommunicate Traitoris, the official imperial designation for a heretic deserving death. In the 10,000 years following the heresy, war bands of the Legion coordinate chaos cult insurrections across entire sectors, maim and bleed imperial forces, force targets to chase phantoms, and turn on each other in panic. They make use of human agents, cults, and lies as core operational tools. In Praetorian of Dorn, a full Alpha Legion infiltration assault targeted the Imperial Fists in the Sol system. Not a raid, an attempt to cripple Terra's defenses. The traitor case isn't conjecture. It's the institutional record of 10,000 years. Here is the loyalist case, stated with equal weight. During the drop site massacre itself, elements of the Alpha Legion allowed the rescue ship carrying Corvus Corax to break through traitor lines and escape. It's in the same battle, in the same moment, an act in direct contradiction to the side they ostensibly occupied. Later in the heresy, Omegon, the hidden twin, the shadow behind Alpharius's public face, initiated the destruction of a jamming array that was preventing the White Scars from learning of Horus's betrayal. The Alpha Legion blockaded Jagatai Khan's fleet long enough for him to receive Rogel Dorn's warning, then provoked hostilities and withdrew. The loyalist Primarch received the message. He chose the Emperor's side. The Alpha Legion made that choice possible. By the Siege of Terra, the Lexicanum records that Omegon, posing as Alpharius, openly withdrew the Alpha Legion from the traitor war effort to take the throne world. As a parting gift, he offered Horus a map of the Sol system's defenses. Not an act of loyalty to Horus, an act that handed the traitor war master Intelligence about the target Omegon was simultaneously abandoning him to never reach.
After the heresy, the Lexicanum records the result plainly. The Alpha Legion became entirely separated from the forces of Horus, but continued to wage war on all they came across, not retreating with the traitor legions into the Eye of Terror, separated from them, permanently, running a parallel operation under a shared banner that it had already quietly removed. In the 41st millennium, the Legion fragments into war bands pursuing at least 3 distinct and contradictory ideological positions. Some embrace chaos openly, some operate with secular pragmatism, and a documented third type, classified in 40K lore as the Faithless, worships the Emperor as a god while attacking imperial targets, claiming their actions strengthen humanity over the long term. 3 incompatible positions under the same Hydra insignia. Every legionary calls himself Alpharius. The Warhammer community's own pages on the Alpha Legion confirm the doctrine. All Alpha Legion Space Marines adopt the name and identity of the Primarch to outsiders, altering their appearances, denying any enemy intelligence a reliable center of gravity. No unit admits to being the command structure. The doctrine has been maintained as institutional practice for 10,000 years. The contradiction can't be resolved at the level of side. Both columns are too fully sourced. The irresolvability follows directly from the documented canon, not from incomplete evidence, but from evidence that points in genuinely opposite directions because the Alpha Legion's operational logic genuinely points in opposite directions depending on which moment you observe. An actor loyal to a side behaves consistently toward that side. An actor loyal to an objective behaves consistently toward the objective, which means it will betray both sides whenever either stops serving the goal. In Deliverance Lost by Gav Thorpe, Alpharius was summoned to what he believed was a war council. He arrived to find an interrogation. Horus, Abaddon, Erebus, the War Master of Chaos, his first captain, and the Word-Bearer's chief apostle. The 3 highest concentrations of authority in the traitor command structure, gathered in one chamber to demand an accounting from their supposed ally. Why had Alpharius halted an operation? The Lexicanum records the result of that confrontation. Alpharius didn't yield. He held his ground against the War Master, the first captain, and the priest who had set the entire heresy in motion. 3 individuals with total authority over the traitor war effort, and the Alpha Legion Primarch demonstrated that his operations answered to the Alpha Legion's own timeline and no one else's. The War Master could summon him. The War Master couldn't command him. The banner was still up, but the allegiance behind it was always conditional. The banner came off entirely at the Siege of Terra. Post-heresy, the Legion never rejoined the traitor legions retreating into the Eye of Terror. Instead, complete separation, an independent agenda, and war bands running contradictory operations across the galaxy in the name of a Primarch whose actual identity and location no external party can reliably establish. Omegon, on the long view, as recorded in the Lexicanum. We are Alpha Legion, and we take the long view. Not the loyalist view, not the traitor view, the long view. Here is where the argument requires a precise label. What follows is a theory, an interpretation grounded in documented evidence, not established canon. Games Workshop has maintained deliberate ambiguity about the Emperor's state and the Alpha Legion's allegiance for decades, intentionally and consistently. The Two Emperors reading isn't GW's formal position. Their own official framing on the Emperor's condition is explicit about the ambiguity. The exact health and fate of the emperor is both vague and hotly debated. Is he alive? Is he a god? Or just a rotting corpse on a throne, acting as the bulb for a glorified psychic lighthouse? That ambiguity is load-bearing. Flag it once and proceed. There are now two emperors, one institutional, one intentional. They are no longer the same thing. The first is the being on the golden throne, located beneath the imperial palace, in the Sanctum Imperialis, under what was once Mount Everest. The throne sits at the center of a chamber nearly 4 miles in length, half a mile high. The emperor's body sits within it, described in the Warhammer 40K fandom wiki as a shattered, decaying form that can no longer support life, maintained only by the throne's mechanisms and his own psychic power. 1,000 psychers are sacrificed every solar day, their life energies absorbed to project the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that makes warp navigation possible across the Imperium. His mind remains active in the Immaterium, fighting chaos, sustaining the beacon, contesting the warp entities that assault the wards around the Imperial Palace. But the body can't speak, can't move, can't govern. The Heteron Guard, 300 Adeptus Custodes veterans, each with no fewer than 5 centuries of service, stand watch over something that is kept alive but can't acknowledge them. This is the emperor the imperial cult worships as a god, the god-emperor of mankind. He appears radiant and divine on every chapel wall in every system in the Imperium, despite the documented fact that during the Great Crusade, the emperor explicitly forbade worship of himself. He promoted the imperial truth, a rationalist and secular doctrine, as the foundational philosophy of his civilization. He publicly humiliated Lorgar and the entire Word-Bearers Legion for worshipping him. He destroyed the city of Monarchia, a city built in his honor, as punishment. The Lexicanum records the Horus heresy itself, identifying that moment as a contributing cause of Lorgar's eventual corruption. The emperor wasn't indifferent to being worshipped, he was actively hostile to it. The Adeptus Ministorum calls him divine. He would have called the Adeptus Ministorum heretics, the corpse god on the throne. The institution built around him across 10,000 years. That is the first emperor. The second emperor is the original intent, the entity who had a plan before the plan was shattered. The Golden Throne wasn't built to be a coffin. The device's core was discovered by the emperor buried under a desert on the Asian continent of Terra during the Unification Wars, before the imperial palace complex existed in the Himalayan mountains. The fandom wiki is explicit about what it was: a powerful psychic amplifier capable of serving as a portal into the labyrinth dimension of the webway, based on Terra. The emperor's modification of the device, which consumed decades of work by tens of thousands of Mechanicum tech priests and Terran laborers, had nothing to do with life support. He was building an entrance point into the Aeldari webway for the entire human species. The project's goals, as documented on the fandom wiki's Golden Throne entry: instantaneous interstellar travel for humanity without the warp. No navigators, no astropaths, no exposure to demonic incursion through the immaterium. And beyond that infrastructure, the elimination of the psychic vulnerability that made humanity the primary food source for chaos. Either remove the psyker mutation from the human genome entirely, or ensure that as humanity evolved into a fully psychic species, it did so safely inside the psychically shielded webway, permanently insulated from the ruinous powers. The fandom wiki records his reasoning directly. The throne and the webway project offered his species its best chance to free itself forever from the dangers of the ruinous powers. He kept it secret from everyone, from Malkador, from Rogel Dorn, from the Primarchs. The fandom wiki records that even Horus, the War Master, his most beloved and trusted son, had no idea what the Emperor was building beneath the palace. The secrecy wounded them. The wounded pride was exploited by chaos. The exploitation produced the heresy, and the heresy killed the plan. Magnus the Red's psychic warning, intended to alert the Emperor about Horus, delivered as a desperate act of sorcery, shattered the protective wards surrounding the Emperor's fragile webway construct. The sending wreaked havoc upon the protective psychic shielding, per the fandom wiki. Not the Eldar webway as a whole. What was destroyed was the human-made extension beneath the Imperial Palace, the tunnels, the portal, the machinery of the project. Demons poured through the breach. Thousands of Mechanicum workers inside the tunnels were slaughtered. The Emperor, instead of operating the throne to advance his plan, had to physically occupy it to contain the demonic incursion and seal the breach against further intrusion. The chair designed to open a door into humanity's future became the only available plug for the wound Magnus had torn open. The Imperium was scaffolding. The webway was the mechanism. Humanity surviving chaos across cosmic time was the actual objective. Magnus didn't destroy the project through malice. He destroyed it through exactly the kind of reckless sorcery the Emperor had forbidden, exactly the kind of warp manipulation the Imperial truth was supposed to prevent, which is its own kind of commentary. Dan Abnett's The End and the Death, the concluding volume of the Siege of Terra series, represents the lore's most detailed treatment of what the Emperor was becoming at the moment his plan finally closed. The framing from readers of the text, preserved in fan discussions. The Emperor, in the final confrontation with Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, draws so deeply on the power of the warp that he begins transmuting his flesh, his nature, the substance of what he is, into something no longer fully material, something that might be characterized as deification, in the sense that what sits on the golden throne after Rogel Dorn carries his broken body back to Terra isn't quite what boarded the Vengeful Spirit. The forum record from Bolter and Chainsword's discussion of the book captures it. The Emperor is silent. He's no longer talking to anyone, in any way. He is too far gone. That is the state that becomes permanent, not death. He is functionally alive in the warp, contesting demons, maintaining the Astronomicon, guarding the wards, but gone in the sense of no longer accessible, no longer able to communicate his intent, correct his institution, or stop the religion being built around the silence where his voice used to be. The Terminus Decree adds the final layer. The Emperor left instructions that he wasn't allowed to leave the Golden Throne once he was on it, not even if returned to life, reborn in another body, or ascended as some kind of warp entity. The Grey Knights were charged with enforcing this against even the Emperor's potential future selves. He tried to constrain the things he might become, in advance, through written doctrine. An entity that anticipated its own multiple possible future states tried to preemptively limit them, and still ended up unable to do anything but sustain the very institution it never intended to build. Two emperors. The original intent, a secular plan to free humanity from chaos, grounded in reason and psychic engineering, kept secret even from his sons. And the corpse god, a decaying body on a machine surrounded by a religion that worships the silence where his governance used to be, sustained by psych or sacrifice he would have found incompatible with everything he said he was trying to build. This isn't a dramatic interpretation. It's a direct consequence of what the documented lore records.
Approximately 2 years before Istvan III, set 2 years before the beginning of the Horus heresy, as the Lexicanum's entry on Legion confirms, the Cabal approached the Alpha Legion through John Grammaticus. Grammaticus was a human perpetual, effectively immortal through resurrection, embedded in the 670th Expedition Fleet's Geno 5-2 Chiliad, under the cover identity of Koenig Henneker, running a mission for an organization that had spent longer fighting chaos than humanity had existed as a thinking species. The Cabal, a multi-species Xenos conspiracy whose operatives were drawn from more than 1,000 different intelligent species. That number is confirmed across multiple summaries of Dan Abnett's Legion, the 7th novel in the Horus Heresy series, and represents the scope of a conspiracy that predates the Imperium by an era humanity can't meaningfully calculate. Their stated purpose, the eradication of chaos, which they called the primordial annihilator. Their actual motivation, not altruism. The Cabal was coldly utilitarian, primarily concerned with their own survival, and willing to sacrifice an entire species, including humanity, to eliminate the thing threatening them. They weren't trying to save humans. They were trying to save the rest of the universe from the psychic fuel humanity was producing for the ruinous powers. John Grammaticus, in the Bits and Pieces review of Legion, is characterized as a reluctant anti-hero who has been working for the Cabal a very long time. An immortal man who had lived long enough to become compromised by the organization that kept bringing him back. He wasn't a neutral messenger. He was an instrument, and the Cabal wasn't neutral either. What they brought to the meeting was something secondary sources term the acuity, a form of collective psychic farsight described as far more potent than Eldar Farseer precognition. Not a probability engine, a living vision of two possible futures, experienced as direct perception of what would happen under each scenario. Future 1. Horus wins. He defeats the Emperor, conquers the Imperium. A remnant of his former honor survives the corruption, generating self-loathing that tears the traitor forces apart in internal wars of escalating brutality. Humanity is extinguished within 2 or 3 generations. The Chaos God's power depends on humanity's psychic output. The extinction of mankind causes the extinction of the ruinous powers in the material universe. The galaxy is freed of chaos permanently, at the cost of every human being alive or yet to be born. Future 2. The Emperor wins. He defeats Horus but is sacrificed in doing so. His body is interred. The Imperium stagnates, technologically, culturally, spiritually, generating misery and fear and oppressive conformity that feeds the Chaos Gods, allowing them to grow stronger across millennia. Over 10 to 20,000 years, Chaos's influence spreads until the galaxy and every sentient species within it are consumed. The ruinous powers win. Later, slower, with more suffering accumulated along the route. This distinction requires direct statement. The Cabal didn't promise Alfarius humanity's survival if he sided with Horus. They offered humanity's extinction as the mechanism for Chaos's extinction. This isn't a pro-human mission. They were asking the Alpha Legion to doom their own species to save the rest of the cosmos. The Cabal didn't care whether humanity survived. They cared whether Chaos survived. And their calculations said humanity had to go for Chaos to follow. The prescription: side with Horus. Ensure his decisive victory. Sacrifice everything. The Lexicanum's entry on Alfarius Omegon records the initial response to this proposal. Omegon snarled. Alfarius called it unthinkable. The word used is emphatic. Then, apparently, acceptance. The apparently is doing more work than it appears to. The Cabal presented only 2 futures. Nothing in the primary sources confirms that 2 futures were literally all the acuity contained. That was the Cabal's interpretation of their own psychic vision, filtered through their own agenda, their own survivalism, their own willingness to sacrifice one species for strategic advantage.
Later Horus Heresy material depicts them as an organization whose predictions proved incomplete. Their mechanism for engineering Horus's victory failed. The Horus who was supposed to destroy chaos by destroying humanity destroyed himself before he could accomplish either. The organization that briefed Alpharius was subsequently hunted to extinction, with Alpha Legion involvement implicated in that hunting. No lasting allegiance to the messengers. The mission, if Alpharius had one, belonged to the Legion, not to whoever delivered the briefing. What Legion and Mike Brooks's later Alpharius, head of the Hydra, together imply, as a bounded reading of the primary texts, is that Alpharius's decision wasn't simple acceptance of the Cabal's logic. It was a parallel calculation. If the Emperor's actual objective was the defeat of chaos and humanity's survival across cosmic time, not the Imperium as a political structure, not the institution of the throne, but the underlying goal that the Webway project was engineered to deliver, then the Cabal's information about the Emperor wins scenario described a real problem. The Imperium as built feeds chaos, the stagnation, the sacrifice economy, the religion generating exactly the kind of psychic misery the ruinous powers consume most efficiently. If that's the machine the Emperor's death leaves running, then the machine is doing the opposite of what the Emperor built his machine to do. The oath, on this reading, was kept by breaking what stood between the oath and its fulfillment. The mission honored by abandoning the institution that replaced it. The twin structure holds an echo of this that is available without overstating it. Alpharius and Omegon, described in the Lexicanum as one soul in two bodies, a public face and a hidden architect, two expressions of a single purpose. Two bodies, one intent. The two emperors reading has the same structure, one being expressed in two forms, the corpse on the throne and the original purpose behind it, increasingly separated by 10,000 years of institutional drift, held together only at the level of objective and no longer at the level of form. Both constructions describe the same problem. What happens when two expressions of one intent diverge from each other? And which one you decide to serve determines everything about whether you look like a traitor. The institutional response to all of this is the most revealing single fact remaining. The Alpha Legion is classified excommunicate traitoris. The designation is clean and the response is defined. They betrayed the Emperor. They fight the Imperium. They die when found. That framing is institutionally necessary in a way that has nothing to do with whether it's accurate. A traitor can be hunted. A traitor's existence threatens people physically, but it doesn't threaten anything else. A traitor legion can be condemned, its history buried in the most restricted archives, its continued existence treated as a military problem to be solved with enough firepower. The alternative reading isn't manageable in the same way. A legion that concluded, on the basis of information and logic the Emperor himself might have accepted, that the Imperium as it is represents an obstacle to the Emperor's actual purpose, isn't a traitor. It's an indictment. It says, you have built a religion around a corpse who would have burned you for it. The stagnation you maintain is exactly what was predicted by the entity you're using as a shield. The misery and fear and oppressive conformity you enforce are feeding the warp you claim to fight.
The institution you defend with your lives is operating as the mechanism of the outcome you were supposed to prevent. The Cabal's second vision, the Emperor wins scenario, stagnation escalating into chaos consuming all, describes the 41st millennium with an uncomfortable degree of structural accuracy. The Imperium is in technological stasis so severe that innovation is treated as heresy. It executes people for questioning the doctrines of a man who spent his great crusade actively condemning doctrine. It generates exactly the kind of systemic terror, suffering, and ignorance that the Chaos Gods consume most efficiently. The Fabricator General has reportedly stated the Golden Throne has, at best, a century of function remaining.
When it fails, when the Psyker sacrifices stop sustaining the Astronomicon, when the warp becomes unnavigable, when the Imperium fragments without the beacon, the second vision plays to its conclusion. The Inquisition would burn a planet to keep this question unasked. Not because the question is wrong, because if it's right, 10,000 years of Imperial doctrine are revealed as the stagnation the Cabal predicted. A traitor legion is a security problem. A legion that might be more faithful to the Emperor's actual word than the Emperor's own servants is an existential argument wearing Hydra iconography. The safest institutional response is to maintain the traitor label, continue the hunt, and never examine what the alternative would mean. So the label holds. Maintained not because it's accurate, but because the accuracy of the alternative is worse. The honest final position. We don't know if the Acuity's two-future model was correct. The Cabal's farsight was constrained by their own agenda, their own survivalism. Their mechanism for delivering Horus's victory failed. The Horus wins destroys chaos path was never tested, because the Cabal failed to engineer it. Whether their diagnosis of the Emperor wins future was accurate remains unknowable, because it's still unfolding. The 41st millennium matches the broad strokes of their prediction, but broad strokes match isn't the same as confirmed prophecy. The Lexicanum's entry on Alfarius includes a line attributed to Alfarius himself about the record he left behind. This is his record, and all the records are lies. That is either a warning or a joke, and with the Alpha Legion, the difference between those two things is often the point. At the Battle of Pluto, the confrontation in the Sol system documented in Praetorian of Dorn by John French, Rogel Dorn killed an Alpha Legion Primarch. The Lexicanum's account of the battle is specific. Before the operation, Alfarius used his librarians to psychically switch identities with his trusted Heromaster, Kel Salonius. He erased his own memories as a security measure, took on Salonius's persona, and infiltrated the Sol system personally, while a fleet of 200 Alpha Legion warships entered separately under different cover. The real Salonius led the warships. The Primarch ran sabotage. During the confrontation in the Hydra Fortress Moon above Pluto, both Dorn's Huskarls and Alfarius's Lernaean bodyguard teleported in, and both Primarchs proceeded to slaughter the other's warriors. Throughout the fight, the Lexicanum records Alfarius making his case, that Dorn didn't understand what he was actually fighting for, that Alfarius wasn't there for Horus, that they both cared about the future, that only the Alpha Legion knew what the real conflict required. Dorn outplayed him. He saw a spear strike coming, stepped into it deliberately, tanking it through his shoulder to pin Alfarius in place, seized the weapon, removed Alfarius's hands at the wrists, slashed him across the chest, and cut through his skull with his chainsword, Storm's Teeth. Then Dorn buried the entire event. He suppressed all knowledge of Alfarius's presence in the Sol system.
He promoted every witness to Huskarl rank, ensuring their silence through obligation and loyalty. He denied Alfarius any acknowledgement, any honor, any record. The man who killed him decided the killing was better kept secret. The man who killed the Alpha Legion's Primarch agreed the truth was too dangerous to publish. Which twin actually died remains deliberately unresolved. The twin structure makes certainty impossible by design. Two bodies, one soul. Omegon sensed the death and grew distant, then continued operating. The Legion continued. The long view continued. We are Alfarius. It's the Legion's oldest joke and its deepest truth simultaneously, that no one, not even the Legion, can be certain which emperor they're serving when they say it. But the reason no one can answer the loyal or traitor question is that everyone keeps asking about a side, when the Alpha Legion was only ever loyal to an outcome. The Imperium prays to a god on a throne. The Alpha Legion serves the thing that god was supposed to do. And if those two have stopped being the same, If the man on the throne is already a corpse, and the cult around him is just inertia and incense, then the most hunted, most hated, most distrusted legion in the galaxy will be the only one still keeping the Emperor's actual word. They told you they were traitors. They never told you to whom. If you've been following this channel's work on the Emperor's state and the Golden Throne, this is the companion piece, the Alpha Legion angle on the same thesis. Subscribe to stay with the thread.